Welcome back to McNulty's Book Corral. It's a kind of a moody spring evening here, and I thought that I would pull out 3 Spooktacular Anthologies, and we're going to start with John Collier. John Collier was born in 1901 and died in 1980. And the first anthology we're going to talk about here is Fancies and Goodnights by John Collier, which was originally published in the early 50s, I believe. And this has an introduction. This edition has an introduction by Ray Bradbury, and it features some of his best stories. They're all good. For this episode, I'm only going to point out one notable story from each anthology. With the other 2 anthologies, I'll tell you all of the stories. This is a collection. There are numerous great stories in here you should read. I would recommend stuff like, the first one, Bottle Party, is a classic. There's a story in here that I think is just incredible, which is, I gotta find it here, sorry about that. Midnight Blue is great. Evening Primrose is spectacular. It's about a guy that decides to live his life in a department store. Really creepy. The story of note here is the final story in the anthology because it was adapted into a Twilight Zone episode, and that would be The Chaser. I'm sure you're familiar with that episode. The story is much shorter than you would think it would be if you're familiar with the episode. But I'm a huge Twilight Zone fan. I have an episode out there about Rod Serling and some of that material. Early on when I started this channel, 3 years ago, I did that episode on Rod Serling. I might return to him again. We'll see. This is easily found on Amazon. You can also find it on, eBay, whatever. So if you're interested in stories that are different, different type of things, they're not always blatantly supernatural. Collier wasn't that type of writer. He was not a pulp writer. He published these in the Slicks, the more expensive magazines sometimes. Really remarkable material here. I'm quite fond of John Collier, and I read him now and again. I'll just pick this up and I'll go through it and I'll pick out, I'll think to myself, okay, I'm going to read 2 stories today, and I'll just pick 2 that I hadn't read in a while, and I'll read them just because I like the flow of his language. I like the way that he would set up the plot. He's always surprising because you'd think it's going in one direction and then it doesn't. He's really a subtle writer, really fantastic. So out of these anthologies, here's the first one, Fancies and Goodnights by John Collier, the great John Collier. Let me just set that over here. The next one is really interesting. We're going to get to a collection called The Haunted Looking Glass, and these are ghost stories chosen by the artist. He was also a writer, but the artist Edward Gorey, who illustrated the book. Here's his illustration here on the cover. This relates to the next anthology too. And he chose these stories, and the notable story here is the very first one, which is Algernon Blackwood's The Empty House. So let me tell you the other stories in here, though, because he picked a really good selection, and they're not commonly found stories, and I love that when you get a Spooktacular anthology where the stories aren't the same ones over and over again. He followed The Empty House by Algernon Blackwood with August Heat by W.F. Harvey, The Signal Man by Charles Dickens, that one's fairly common. Visitor from Down Under by L.P. Hartley. I'm familiar with L.P. Hartley, but I hadn't read this story until I read this. The 13th Tree by R.H. Malden, I had never read before. The Body Snatcher by Robert Louis Stevenson is rather common. It's a classic. Man Size in Marble by E. Nesbit, that one I had not read before. The Judge's House by Bram Stoker. Shadow of a Shade by Tom Hood, I had not read before. The Monkey's Paw by W. Jacobs is one of the most frightening short stories I have ever read. Most people agree it's at the top 10 list of scary stories. The Dream Woman by Wilkie Collins. I'm familiar with Wilkie Collins. I hadn't read The Dream Woman. And Casting the Rooms by M.R. James. So The Empty House by Algernon Blackwood is a very short tale about a house that possesses an evil spirit. And it's the spirit that possesses the house that forces this aunt and her nephew to go in, and they're kind of daring themselves to go into the house. There are no blatant monsters in the story, but at the end of it, gosh, it's pretty scary. You know, they call whatever it is, they call it It. Does that sound familiar? Stephen King is well acquainted with Algernon Blackwood. I'm not saying he copied this, but he has cited many of these writers as having an influence on him, along with H.P. Lovecraft, by the way. So listen to the opening paragraph by Algernon Blackwood. Certain houses, like certain persons, manage somehow to proclaim at once their character for evil. In the case of the latter, no particular feature need betray them. They may boast an open countenance and an ingenious smile, and yet a little of their company leaves the unalterable conviction that there is something radically amiss with their being, that they are evil. Willy-nilly, they seem to communicate an atmosphere of secret and wicked thoughts, which makes those in their immediate neighborhood shrink from them as from a thing diseased. The great Algernon Blackwood. I'm going to come back to Algernon Blackwood in a different episode later on. Maybe in the fall I'm going to do an episode on him, because there's some really fantastic collections, reprint collections out there. I think Starkhouse. If that's wrong, I'll put a note down below. But I believe that, and I'm collecting those and rereading Algernon Blackwood and reading stuff by Algernon Blackwood I hadn't read before. So Edward Gorey, the great artist, illustrated this. You know, each story gets an illustration. And here's the one for The Empty House. And he was a really spooky artist, he died in, did I give you his date, in 1925, 2000? So recent passing, and I just think he's been fantastic. I have another collection, The Judge's House, you get that spooky chair. Really great late night spooky reading, courtesy of the great artist Edward Gorey, who illustrated the book. Fantastic collection of spooktacular tales. Really lovely, fantastic stuff. Finally, this one goes way back for me. This is a collection which has cover art by and drawings by none other than Edward Gorey. It's Hauntings, Tales of the Supernatural, edited by Henry Mazzio. And let me look at the date on this. It is, I believe this was 1968. So I've had this book for a very long time. And this is a superb collection with a superb artwork by Edward Gorey on here that makes you look out the window. When you look at the cover here, which the scan is here, look at it closely. With Edward Gorey, I really love Edward Gorey, okay? That's why I kind of picked these two. There's a story in here, however, that I consider one of the top 10 great short stories, and it's a short story. It's not all that long, and it is by none other than August Derleth of Arkham House fame. And look at the spooky drawings by Edward Gorey on here. Isn't that magnificent? It's called The Lonesome Place. And this is about a little place in a tree in a small town in America that has something evil living in it. And the story is so brilliantly written, and it's less than 5 pages. So I'm going to read to you the last paragraph. So spoiler alert, if you don't want to know how this brilliant story ends, I think most of you familiar with Arkham House and August Derleth are familiar with this story. But no, yeah, I will. I got to read it because I just love the ending. And the worst is not that there is nothing to do, but that the lonesome place is being changed. The village is cutting down some of the trees now, removing the sheds, and putting up a streetlight in the middle of that place. It will not be dark and lonesome any longer, and the thing that lives there will have to go somewhere else, where people are unsuspecting, to some other lonesome place, in some other small town or city or countryside, where it will wait as it did here for some frightened little boy or girl to come along, waiting in the dark and the lonesomeness. It, again, the word it comes up in reference to the creature. I'm quite confident that Stephen King was influenced by this story and Algernon Blackwood. That's not to take away anything from Stephen King's fantastic novel, It, which is one of my all-time favorite books. So August Derleth. So let me tell you about some of the other stories in this superb collection. And I got to find the contents page if I could. Wouldn't that be exciting if I could get there, right? Where the heck is it? What did I do with it here? Here it is. Okay, so we have The Lonesome Place. In the Vault by H.P. Lovecraft. The Man Who Collected Pole by Robert Bloch. I mean, oh my God, what a story that is. Where Angels Fear by Manly Wade Wellman. What a superb writer he was. Lot number 249 by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I believe that is a fairly common story. The Haunted Doll's House by M.R. James. M.R. James is in the other one. The Open Door by Mrs. Oliphant. Thus I Refute Beasley by none other than John Collier. Levitation by Joseph Payne Brennan. Superb. I think I covered Joseph Payne Brennan in a different episode. The Ghostly Rental by Henry James. The Face by E.F. Benson. The Whistling Room by William Hope Hodgson. I haven't covered much of William Hope Hodgson yet. Maybe I'll get to him. The Grey Ones by J.B. Priestley. The Stolen Body by H.G. Wells. The Red Lodge by H. Russell Wakefield. The Visiting Star by Robert Aikman. And Midnight Express by Alfred Noyes. These are all superb tales collected by Edward Mazio with drawings by Henry Mazio with drawings by Edward Gorey, the great spooky Edward Gorey. Yeah, I love this anthology. I love all three of these books. So now I have a question for you. You out there, the reader, reading in the dark, who's looking at these anthologies. It's dark outside. It's a little moody out. There's some clouds came in late in the afternoon. And the wind is blowing, and you can hear the trees out there. And at night, at midnight, and we're close to midnight here because I'm filming this late in the day. I got that big bright light blaring. Do you feel the spirits are near you after reading stuff like this? Do you feel that they're coming into the room? Do you believe that the dead talk to us through our dreams? Do you feel that houses can be haunted by spirits of the past? Do you believe in the box theory of time, that time surrounds us on all four sides? Interesting things to ponder after reading these anthologies late at night. And that's my gift to you here at McNulty's Book Corral today, to give you something to ponder, something to think about. If the spirits are here, if they're near us, are they coming to get us? What are they trying to tell us? Until we have answers to those questions, my friends, stay well, stay happy, feed your brain, read a book.